Okay, so I'm so excited to welcome today Mark Z. Jacobson, a professor of atmospheric science and civil engineering at Stanford University, where he mentors and teaches numerous students and has done so for many years. And he's the author of a number of textbooks, as well as this most recent amazing new book called 100% Clean Renewable Energy and Storage for Everything, which I highly recommend to everybody. Mark, as you know, on Earth Day, I posted a review of chapter 9 of this book, which is on renewableenergyworld.com. And what I did was I focused on your story, both as a young man, as a student, and as somebody who decided that he was inspired to do something about cleaning up the planet. And so that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. And I'm glad that you can share your time. By the way, to anybody who's listening, Mark has a wonderful Twitter handle. It's MZ Jacobson, at MZ Jacobson. And every day he posts updates on news and information, data on climate science and heating, and particularly the renewable energy solutions that he and his team at Stanford and the Solutions Project have come up with for solving the climate crisis, which we'll talk about today. So thank you, Mark. I want to start back. I think your story as a scientist kind of begins in the 1970s when you were a competitive high school tennis player. And I know you've mentioned this to other people and you've written about this as well, but I think people would like to hear a little bit about how when you went to LA to compete with your team, your teammates would fall ill and you fell ill. And, you know, everybody knows that LA used to be covered in smog, so much of it as a result of all the cars on the road burning fossil fuels and the need to burn fossil fuels to make electricity to power such a big city. When you fell ill and realized what was happening, that this was in fact pollution, this inspired you in your career as a scientist, is that right?
Yeah, well, I travel not only to Los Angeles, but to San Diego when I was around 13 years old to play tennis. And in both cities, the air pollution was horrible. It was very difficult to see. And I wasn't so used to it. It was polluted where I lived in Northern California, but not nearly so bad. And yeah, there was choking smog and difficult to see and hard to breathe. And I just thought, well, why should people live like this? This seems ridiculous that we have to suck up the exhaust of people's exhaust from cars and refineries and other types of smokestacks. And I thought, well, when I get older, this might be something I'll try to understand better and solve this problem. So I focused my high school and college career on trying to understand these problems or to get tools to be able to understand and solve them. And here I am decades later, still working on the same basic project, which is try to understand and solve large-scale air pollution and climate problems to make the world a better place. And the air has gotten better, at least in California, but in the rest of the world, or most of the world, it's still horrible mostly in urban areas, but also in rural areas, near urban areas. And this is a large problem that we need a really fast solution, because not only is air pollution a problem that kills 7 million people each year worldwide, but global warming is a huge and growing problem that is also causing devastation and will cause even more damage over time, including death, and in addition to additional fires and sea level rise and flooding. And in any case, so yeah, I was inspired by the pollution, and that's why I worked to get to where I am now, looking at this problem.
And we're so happy that you did do that. By the mid-1990s, Mark, back when my son Dylan was born, you had already racked up an impressive list of degrees from both Stanford and UCLA and begun a teaching career at Stanford. And since then, you've mentored many environmental students in their careers. And I'm just wondering, do you have any idea how many students have come through your classes that you've been able to send off into exciting environmental careers, including climate change action and problem solving for the transition to a cleaner electric-centric energy supply?
Well, I've been teaching at Stanford since 1994. And so I taught a bunch of classes since then for the last 27 years. But it was in 2004 that I helped co-found a program called the Atmosphere Energy Program. And that program really, and I'm the director of that program still, but that program, we try to get students who are passionate about understanding and solving large scale pollution and climate problems through clean renewable energy sources. And since then, we've had over 450, let's say 450 to 500 graduates of that program. And they're mostly master students, but also PhD and undergraduates as well. And then on top of that, well, I've had in that program also my own PhD students, and have several of those who are working, I mean, they're all working still on a topic related to what they studied, and some are at universities, but in particular, the master students that we graduated through the program, I mean, they're all working in the field. Most of them are working in the field, either in companies or nonprofits or for the government or for a government or in education. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really proud of them because they came into the program interested to solve these problems, and now they're helping to solve the problems from all areas of society. And this is really, it makes me really proud to see the evolution of the students coming from students to going in the workforce, and also becoming thought leaders throughout the world.
That's right. That's right. Speaking of your students, again, you and your students work together, as I read in your book and as I've read in other places, to demonstrate how renewable power can essentially replace the need for fossil fuel being coal, fuel, oil, and natural gas. And New York State was the first state that you modeled for 100% renewable energy. And by the word model, for those who don't know, what you did was you sort of mapped it. You created a template, if you will, to show what resources, wind, water, and solar resources, could be harnessed together and combined to create a 100% renewable energy infrastructure for the state of New York. That's what modeling is, when you put it all together in a model. So I'm curious, when you did this work with your students, what kind of information did you ask them to go out into the field, if you will, and gather for you so that you could come up with these very detailed, comprehensive plans for each state, in particular New York as the first one?
Well, the first thing we need is energy data from today, basically, or the contemporary energy data in each energy sector and for each fuel type. Then we project that forward to 2050. Then we convert the energy from fossil fuel energy to a renewable energy. And so we need information about renewable energy resource potentials in each state. So how much potential is there, like in New York, for wind and solar and any other type, hydroelectric or geothermal or whatnot. And also, like, how much rooftop area is there? We need information on the cost of energy. We need information on air pollution, mortality, and morbidity, because that's how much, we want to avoid that. So we need to know how much is occurring right now. We need to know about what are the CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gas and particle emissions that affect climate coming from New York, so we can look at the benefit of reducing those emissions. And then as I mentioned, cost data, looking, but not only energy cost data, but health cost data and climate cost data. So there's all sorts of data that are needed to do these analyses, and not only for New York, but other states. Right. And so students were instrumental in helping to obtain these data.
Great. So your students would come back with the data that you sent them out to get. How did you actually, in a way, you kind of already answered this question. You would assemble all of that information that you just outlined and create a plan, if you will, a need on the one hand, a need for the amount of renewable energy, and then on the other side, I suppose, a supply which demonstrated how you could fit the supply to the need. Is that essentially how it all worked?
Well, we're looking at, yeah, we start with demand data for today and we project that forward. And then we convert that to clean renewable energy, namely wind, water, and solar.
Right.
And then we look at how much supply of renewables is available. We estimate a mix. We come up with a mix of renewables that will meet that demand. But we constrain the mix of renewables by available resources. And we don't want to take up too much land. So some of it's going to go offshore. Then other going to go on rooftops, like rooftop solar, photovoltaics. And we'll use some hydroelectric power that already exists. So we're trying to minimize land, mostly onshore wind and large scale solar. That's going to take up the most land. So yeah, we're trying to balance supply with demand. And then, we try to first meet the annual average demand for power. But then in later studies, we looked at trying to meet continuous power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and for the whole year or multiple years. And so that's more challenging. Then we have to involve storage and using what's called demand response, where utilities give people incentives not to use electricity at different times of the day, have different price structures for shifting the times of peak energy use, and also interconnecting over large distances to help, when the wind's not blowing in one place, it's often blowing somewhere else. So you want to bring in power from another place. And so that's really the final thing, is to trying to match power demand continuously over time. And that involves not only generation, but storage, demand response, transmission.
So for younger students who might be watching, can you explain what it means to go to a 100% clean, renewable energy future by 2050? For example, that's only 29 years away. So by the time many young students are entering, the middle of their career, the exciting part of their career, we're going to be in 2050. So what does that world look like if we're able to achieve it? What does a clean energy world, clean renewable energy world look like in 2050?
Well, the idea is to eliminate burning things, so eliminate combustion. So we would have no oil, gas, or coal combustion, or even bioenergy combustion. We want to electrify everything, or in some cases provide just direct heat, where both the electricity and heat come from wind and water and solar power. So onshore and offshore wind, solar photovoltaics on rooftops and in power plants, concentrated solar power, some geothermal electricity and heat, and tidal and wave power, and existing hydroelectric power. So it's all clean renewable energy. So no air pollution, no climate emissions, climate affecting emissions, more local energy. So you have more energy security as well, because you're not trying to find energy outside of a country necessarily, although there might be a benefit of exchanging energy between nearby countries. Mm-hmm. And this will reduce costs of energy. So you'll have a lower cost energy system and need less energy because it's more efficient. Electric heat pumps, for example, used for heating and cooling in homes, are much more efficient than gas heaters. Electric cars are much more efficient than gasoline cars. So we use less energy, we have less pollution, we'll create more jobs, because installing all this infrastructure and building it will create a lot more jobs than will be lost in the fossil fuel industry. And will provide energy security. So it's really a no-lose situation, but most people won't notice the difference. I mean, if you were, except for the benefits in terms of air pollution and climate and the lower costs, I mean, if you're in your home, it's going to function the same. It's not like you lose the ability to function in your home. All your appliances will work just as well as they did before, some even better. And most people won't even notice that, driving an electric car, it'll be quieter, there'll be less pollution, there'll be more acceleration, it'll be safer. But you're not going to deteriorate, you're not going to lose your quality of life by transitioning to clean renewable energy.
And young
quality of life should
tennis
improve.
players on the field, on the court, will not be suffering the way you did when you were a teen.
Yeah, ideally, yeah, people running outdoors, biking, walking, exercising, or competing, they're not going to suffer air pollution nearly to the same degree. There'll still be some natural pollution from natural wildfires, but there's still volcanic eruptions, there's
Sure.
still soil dust from deserts, wind-blown desert dust, pollen and spores. We're not going to get rid of those, but we will eliminate the human air pollution, which in cities is usually like 90 to 95% of the air pollution. And even in rural areas, it's most of it these days. It's between 50 and 80% of rural air pollution.
And at the same time, of course, that we're creating a cleaner planet and healthier air, we're beginning to cool the planet back down to a sustainable temperature.
Yeah, right now global warming is about 1.2 degrees to 3 degrees Celsius since the late 1800s. And that's the average, but in some places, like in the Arctic, it's like 5 to 6 degrees Celsius warmer. And so we will reduce the globally average temperature slowly over time. That's not going to happen right away, because even if we stop all emissions, carbon dioxide and some other long-lived greenhouse gases will stay in the atmosphere for a while before they naturally come out. But we will, some pollutants like black carbon, which is a particle component, that will come out of the air right away. And it's also something that affects people's health. So by stopping the emissions of, for example, black carbon, we not only immediately improve people's health, but we immediately reduce climate damage. Black carbon is the second leading cause of global warming after carbon dioxide. It causes between like 16 to 20% of the warming. So that can have a very fast impact very quickly and very strongly.
Excuse me, sorry, thank you. Where does methane fit into that? You mean carbon
The
dioxide?
methane is a close number three in terms of the leading causes of global warming. And methane comes
carbon dioxide, black carbon, and methane are the three top causes of generally in general cases, man-made induced climate change.
Yeah, that's correct.
We're burning fossil fuels, which is emitting these components into the air and causing the atmosphere to heat. You mentioned the poles, the North Pole and the South Pole. And although I don't have this in my questions, I think some people might be scratching their head, especially if they're maybe students in middle school or high school, wondering, well, if it's cold there, why is it heating faster? Can you explain what if I'm saying it correctly, the albedo effect is?
Yeah, well, the places with snow and sea ice, I mean, the Arctic is an ocean and it's covered with ice. It's a thin layer of ice, might be 1 to 2 or 3 meters thick. But on top of that, you have snow. To the Arctic, the ocean itself is very dark. So that if it's dark, that ocean water is dark. So that means if you have sunlight hitting ocean water, most of that sunlight gets absorbed by the ocean itself.
Right.
The ocean will warm up. In fact, the reflectivity of the ocean is only about 7-8% or 6 to 8%. In other words, so that's the albedo or reflectivity, 6 to 8%. In other words, 94 to 92% of the sunlight coming to the ocean surface gets absorbed by the surface. Well, if you cover the ocean with sea ice, that has a reflectivity of about 65%. If you cover the sea ice with snow, that has a reflectivity of about 90 to 95%. So a normal, healthy Arctic Ocean has snow on top of sea ice on top of water, and so it's very reflective. Reflects 95% of the sunlight. But as you add black carbon and carbon dioxide to the air, well, the black carbon not only stays in the air, but it settles on top of the sea ice and it darkens it. It settles on top of the snow and the sea ice and darkens it and melts it away faster. And the carbon dioxide stays in the air, but it acts as a blanket and also warms the air above the snow and the sea ice, melting it. So the two of those together in particular act to speed up the melting of the snow and the sea ice. So when the snow melts on top of the sea ice, instead of having 95% reflectivity, you uncover the sea ice and you have 65%. So you get more absorption of sunlight, and that heats up the ice faster. When that melts, you have the ocean below, which only has an 8% reflectivity, or 6 to 8%. And that results in a huge amount of warming of the ocean and faster melting of the rest of the ice. So it's a positive feedback
Thank you.
that
Yeah.
triggers even higher temperatures, more melting, and so forth and so on.
Thank you so much for explaining that. It's an important concept that I think a lot of people, don't easily grasp the first time, but you explained it so beautifully. So thank you so much. So Mark, it was about 10 years ago or so that you and I first communicated. You had a story to share with me. I think it was 10 summers ago this summer. Your good friend and clean energy financier, Marco Krapels, introduced you to the Incredible Hulk, otherwise known as Mark Ruffalo, and the filmmaker Josh Fox. And the four of you, a banker, a scientist, an actor, and a filmmaker, came together and decided that you wanted to create something called the Solutions Project, and it's the solutionsproject.org, to help educate people about the ability to transition towns, cities, states, and now even countries, which we'll talk about in a minute, from fossil fuel burning electricity to renewable energy electricity. So I'm curious, how did this partnership and this coming together of minds help you as a team to convince New York Governor Andrew Cuomo that he could begin to accelerate the state's ambitious plans for going renewable and do it even faster, and even ban fracking in the state of New York? I understand it was a bit of a team effort where you all got together.
Yeah, well, we met in July of 2011, and so it's almost the 10-year anniversary of our meeting. And we immediately, from this meeting, I was asked, because Mark Ruffalo and Josh Fox both lived in New York, and they were working a lot against fracking of natural gas in New York. So they were interested in an alternative, and they had heard of my work on developing a 100% clean renewable energy plan for the world as a whole that had appeared in a Scientific American in 2009. And we had done a plan, Mark DeLucchi and myself. Mark DeLucchi is a researcher at UC Davis in Berkeley. We had done a plan for the whole world, but we were asked to, can we develop a plan for New York? And I initially balked because I thought, it's going to be so much work to do this that I just didn't have time. So I said, I'll write one paragraph, but I don't have time right now to do the rest. And I was asked a couple times, but finally, when it was time to write that paragraph, I started writing it, and I got inspired. And it was one night I just got inspired, and I just continued writing throughout the night. And by the time, and I took our world energy plan and I shrunk it down to the scale of New York, and I found some new data, just kind of raw data. And by the time the morning came around, I had like a 14 or 15 page New York energy plan.
Wow.
So I did the whole plan in one night. But I presented that plan to, it was not only us four, but there were a few other people, including a couple of Cornell professors, Bob Howarth and Tony Ingraffia, and several others. And I presented it, and they were saying, if we just have a few more nights like this, we can cover the whole US. But it took another year and a half, and I think it was like another 35 revisions of this plan to get a final plan. But we started with this New York energy plan, basically. And we all got inspired. We were all inspired by this ability to not only have a plan, but to have a group of people who represented science, business, culture, and community, who could then educate the public and policymakers about the plan and maybe get it implemented. And so, we were very passionate and very inspired, and we then engaged policymakers and nonprofits. We weren't a nonprofit ourselves. We were kind of we started an informal nonprofit, the Solutions Project, in late 2011, but it didn't become formal until 2013. So it was 2 years. It was behind the scenes. But we engaged NRDC in New York and Sierra Club. Those were the two we started engaging, and they were really on board right away. And among them and ourselves, the group, we had like about 10 people on board in our group already. We engaged the governor's office, and he asked us for 5 suggestions about what to do to go to clean energy. He adopted 3 of them and eventually passed a 50% renewables law in the state of New York, and eventually a 100% law. And he banned fracking ultimately. But it was because he banned fracking. I mean, there were a lot of activists in New York that really supported us, and certainly Mark Ruffalo and Josh Fox, Josh had an Academy Award nomination for the movie Gasland. Right. Also, he did Gasland 2. So they were well known in New York and were well known among activists and really engaged the activists. But we had an alternative. So the activists, it's one thing to be against fracking, but unless you have an alternative, it doesn't really help so much. So that really gelled with the activists, that having a 100% clean renewable energy roadmap for New York. And so they got behind it. And when they went out to protest and to do other activities, they also advocated for 100% renewable energy. And this really helped. All of it helped. Everything together helped to get the governor to finally pass a law to go to 50% and then eventually 100% renewables in the state of New York.
So exciting. And that map for New York eventually led to 50 plans for 50 states. And in the process of moving in that direction, which is remarkable, that's an understatement, how remarkable that effort is. It got the attention of David Letterman, and it got you an appearance on Late Night with David Letterman. Is that right?
Yeah. So, actually, the story behind that was, so the reason David Letterman invited me on his show was he was watching Josh Fox's second movie, Gasland 2. And in there, it's a long movie. And in there, towards the end, I have a couple-minute clip where I'm talking, the movie is about the perils of natural gas fracking. And then I talk about, for a couple minutes, we have an alternative to this. We don't need it. We can do something to solve these problems. And apparently Letterman had saw that and saw not only the movie, but he saw that clip and he says, well, why don't we have this guy on? So that one thing led to another, and I got it on the show.
Yeah, and you did an amazing job. I've watched that clip many times, and of course, I watched you live when I knew you were going on, and I was so impressed with your ability to articulate the science so clearly for people and to make it so accessible, which is one reason why you're so great at what you do, is because you do make everything so accessible. I guess the public, the viewing public that night, their understanding and acceptance of renewables being a legitimate alternative to fossil fuels really must have grown that night when they saw you talking about it for, I think it was about 9 minutes, right?
Yeah, I think it was actually 11,
oh, wow.
11 or so minutes, 11 and a half minutes. And it was very fortunate to have as much time. And I know the New York's governor's office was watching, and so were a lot of other people. I mean, it's very rare that there's ever a scientist, let alone a energy or climate scientist, on the show. I actually I had a colleague, Professor Stephen Schneider, who passed away a few years ago, but in the 1970s, he was a climate scientist, but very eloquent and very clear. And he was on the Johnny Carson show. And I always thought, wow, that'll be, I never expected it in my life that I would ever be able to emulate that, to be able to be on a similar type show. But I thought that would be quite a nice thing, to be able to speak to so many people about an important topic. And because it's so difficult, I mean, I publish a lot, but who reads journal articles? I mean, other scientists, but not too many people in the general public. It's very difficult to get information out on a large scale. And in this case, that's what we need. for these large scale problems, we need information to get out on a large scale. So it was a very rare opportunity to get information to a lot of people at one time. And
sure. And that success that you had that evening attracted many other cultural influencers, people like Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert Redford and Sean Lennon and Yoko Ono and a young lady named Leilani Munter, all became fascinated with the work that you were doing to change the way energy is made and used in the world. And I think that Leilani's story, being a race car driver, a woman race car driver, is an interesting one. Can you just share a little bit about how she's working to change the way that race car driving is run and operated using electric, renewably powered electricity?
yeah, so Leilani started joining our work with the Solutions Project, around that time. And Marco Krapels introduced her to us. And she was fantastic, just really positive, a lot of energy. And one of her ideas was to transition NASCAR racing and other racing types to electric, but also using sustainable for not only also for the stadiums too, to make them electric. So not only the cars, but also the stadiums. And she's also vegan, so she was advocating for that as well. But she was a great spokesperson for our cause, and we're still great friends today. I think she's retired from race car driving now, but she still works on a lot of these causes and still very supportive.
That's wonderful. And many members of your team, I don't know if the whole team was able to go, but at one point, the Solutions Project, including yourself, you had the good fortune to go to the White House in Washington, D.C. and meet with President Joe Biden when he was Vice President Joe Biden under President Barack Obama. And I think a lot of people would like to know, what was it like to be able to have that sort of audience and share, as you had done before on late night, to share the excitement and potential for clean, 100% clean renewable energy with him?
Yeah, well, we went to the White House, a group of us, including Mark Ruffalo and Marco Krapels and Leilani and a few other people. And it was a very good experience. Although when we walked in, he was already on board with our plan. We had sent some information ahead of time, and apparently he'd been briefed or had read it. And when he walked in, he says, "Oh yeah, I'm already supportive, so you don't have to convince me." So we didn't talk about the plans at all for the time we were there, about an hour. He was basically telling stories the whole time.
Oh my goodness.
And he did give us some advice about talking to the public, about how you have to reach mom and pop and speak to the people, which, as opposed to, and not speak science, we can speak the language of the people. And that was a good lesson. And he was very, so he had some suggestions on how to communicate with people on the street and just
Right.
people in the communities.
They're the voters, and they're the
Yeah.
ones who are going to make the decision on what kind of leaders we have that will either choose to or not choose to push forward on climate change solutions like yours. In 2015, you had another amazing opportunity, and you went to Paris and spoke at the Paris Climate Conference about the ability to not just power the United States, but actually to power the world with 100% clean renewable energy and storage for everything. And I'm wondering, I know you were bookended by two pretty famous global leaders. What was that sort of elite experience for you like, and how did it help to further magnify what it was that you're trying to share with the world, this important information about clean energy?
Yeah, so I went to the climate conference in Paris, and I had a few talks, but most of them were kind of minor venues. But there's one that I had a talk that was sandwiched between Ban Ki-moon, who was the head of the United Nations, and John Kerry, who was the Secretary of State of the US at the same time. And the main thing I remember was me walking on the stage, and Ban Ki-moon was walking off with his security detail, and then me walking off the stage and John Kerry walking on with his security detail. I was the only one with no security. but I think I gave a pretty effective talk. I mean, it was very, I don't know, 5 to 10 minute talk. And yeah, it was a good audience, but it was also on video too. So it was broadcast through after that for quite a while. But yeah, it was a very good opportunity to give a short talk to have, and I just finished actually, I think our first, it was at the time, maybe 139 country study. And so I was able to provide results for that to the world, basically, for about these new results showing it's possible to power the world entirely with clean renewable energy. And that, so opportunity to introduce that, and also in front of a lot of dignitaries and people who are big decision makers.
Exactly, and that's so important. And now you have 143 countries mapped for clean renewable energy. Is that right?
Yeah, that was our latest study. Was 143 countries, and they represent about 99.8% of all world emissions.
Wow.
So it's quite, yeah, it covers most of the world. But yeah, the bottom line is it's possible to power every country with 100% clean renewable energy and storage.
So which country or countries are closest to meeting this incredible goal of 100% clean renewable energy by 2050?
Well, if we look at all energy, which is electricity, transportation, buildings, and industry primarily,
right?
Norway is pretty far along, but there's a long tail. I mean, there are 11 countries in the world that, in terms of electricity, they're at 100% renewable already, and those include Norway, Iceland, Costa Rica, but also Albania and Tajikistan, Uruguay, Paraguay, Nepal, Bhutan, Scotland, and Kenya. And most of them have a hydro as their main source. Scotland is mostly wind, but electricity is only 20% of all energy. So when we electrify all energy, I mean, if we look at which countries are furthest ahead in terms of electrifying all energy, yeah, then there a couple, like Norway is pretty high up there, and Iceland and Sweden are doing pretty well. But most countries are way far away. I mean, the United States we're still only around 6 to 8% of the way there. Same with China. Most countries are pretty low. So there are a few small countries that are much further along, but it's still possible to do. I mean, technically it's possible to do, and there is a fast movement. There's a large transition going on right now in many countries and throughout the world. But we do need, just to stop building new fossil fuel plants, we do need to transition transportation to electric vehicles mostly. We do need to transition buildings to get rid of gas in buildings and move to heat pumps and heat pump water heaters and air heaters and air conditioners, and just electrify all appliances in buildings, and go to electrified industry as well, and then provide all the electricity with wind and water and solar.
Right.
And energy efficiency too.
Right. I understand that Google is one of the companies that you actually met with along the way. They were very impressed by a presentation that you gave with your team. And I'm wondering, how far along are they in their goal? I know that they've met certain goals along as each year has passed, but are they all the way to meeting their 2050 goals in terms of their clean energy transition?
In terms of providing their electricity for global operations with renewables, yes, they met that goal, I think, back in 2018. Now, in terms of all energy, like their vehicles, their building, heating, and cooling, I'm not so sure they've focused on that. Most of these commitments have been in electricity.
Got it.
So, however, they have met their electricity with 100% renewables, and now they're trying to do it 24 hours a day, as opposed to in the annual average. like for their data centers, they're trying to meet electricity every minute for a whole year with renewables. So and they're also that they and Apple and some other companies are trying to also get their suppliers to go to 100% renewable. So that's important as well, because
Right.
it's not just their own energy use, electricity use. It's their suppliers' energy use. It's their transportation energy. It's their heating and cooling energy,
Mhm.
and some industrial processes for high temperatures as well.
Right, right. Because as we know, servers take a lot of electricity, mainly to keep them cool.
Yeah, well, to run and you need
Right,
cooling as well.
right, right. So what can people like myself and other viewers do to ensure that the United States, where we live, is able to meet its renewable energy goals by 2050? What's one way that we can help?
Well, everybody can help by trying to eliminate combustion in their lives. If in your own home or apartment, well, people can try to electrify, especially if a home is maybe easier to control than an apartment. But let's say you're in a home and if it's a new home, that's the easiest because you could just build an all electric home, no gas on the property. You don't need to pay for a hookup fee for gas. You don't need gas pipes. You don't need carbon monoxide monitors. You don't need ditches for your gas pipes.
Yeah.
You save a lot of money. You'll save on the order of $15,000 to $20,000 just by not putting gas in a new home. I mean, there's no reason to have two forms of energy in your home, electricity and gas, because
Right,
electricity can do everything that gas can do, and even better in many cases.
right, right.
So yeah, so you could, but even with an existing home, you can electrify that by going from a gas water heater to an electric heat pump water heater, from a gas air heater to a heat pump air heater and air conditioner, from going from a gas stove to an electric induction cooktop stove, a gas dryer to an electric heat pump dryer, using LED lights to reduce energy use, making your home energy efficient by weatherizing your home, sealing up cracks in windows and doors, and energy efficient appliances. There's a lot of choices in appliances and choosing the most energy efficient ones. Going to electric cars in your own life, instead of next time you have to buy a car, go to electric car. And then if you can put solar on your roof, that helps too. One or two batteries in your garage can help to reduce your costs as well in the long run, by being able to charge your battery in the morning, let's say, and then discharge it after the sun goes down, but the rates of electricity are still high and you'll save a lot of money. And so, but even if you have an apartment, you can't change things yourself. A lot of states in the US and places around the world, they now have options to purchase 100% renewable electricity from utilities. So some of these are called community choice aggregation utilities, but now just normal utilities are offering 100% renewable options. So they're usually the same price or very similar price to your regular electricity.
That's right. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's cheaper. Like in Texas, wind power is now cheaper than fossil fuels in many places.
Yeah, that's true. And renewables, new wind onshore and utility scale solar are the cheapest forms of new electricity in the US by far, less than around half the cost of new natural gas. So you'll see, because there's no fuel cost for wind and solar, whereas gas has not only an upfront capital cost, but also a fuel cost. For wind and solar, you just have the upfront capital cost.
Right.
So it's going to be cheaper for sure. And it
So
is already cheaper, in fact.
can you brag a little bit about your house, Mark? Because I know you designed it from the ground up and it is a 100% clean renewable energy home that actually you actually sell clean electrons back to the grid. Am I right?
Yeah, so I've had it for 4 years now, and on average, I've sold it produced 120% of the electricity that I've consumed. So that means the extra 20% I sell back to the grid, and I've been paid for that electricity. But so I have no gas. I have heat pumps for air and water heating and air conditioning, an electric induction cooktop stove. It's very energy efficient home, energy efficient appliances, LED lights, electric cars, batteries in the garage, solar on the roof. And so, yeah, even during a blackout in the neighborhood, my lights will stay on because I have the batteries that will, even if the solar system stops working, the battery still discharge to the house.
So with the benefit of solar power, you are your own generator when everybody else loses their power.
Yeah, normally to do that, you need batteries, although now some companies I think are building inverters that allow you to uh, produce for your solar to continue working even if the grid goes down. Before, if the grid goes down and all you have is solar without batteries, then you're out of luck.
Right.
But if you have batteries or if you have an inverter that allows you to use the solar while the grid goes down, then you're back in luck.
Yes. Right. Right. Um, I understand from an Instagram post I saw. Tell everybody what your Instagram handle is so they can follow you because you post a lot of cool stuff about clean energy.
I think I'm one MZ Jacobson.
I think there's a one and then
Yeah,
MZ Jacobson, right?
yeah.
Um,
Also,
I noticed that a former professor that you love and admire, Jill Masters, and another environmental clean energy guru, Amory Levins, recently visited your home. I'm curious, what did they think of it?
well, first of all, Gil Masters is a mentor of mine from way back when I was in college. When I was an undergraduate at Stanford, he taught a class that really inspired me on environmental science and technology. And he's been a good friend ever since. And was teaching up until last year. And Amory Levins is, of course, an energy efficiency and renewable energy guru who's written many books. And this was the first time Gil had seen my home before, but this is the first time that Amory had seen it. Yeah, he liked it. He noted a few things he wasn't familiar with before, which I was surprised I could find anything he wasn't familiar with. um, but he also told me some new things as well. So yeah, they both enjoyed it, and we're all positive about. Yeah, we're happy to see all these innovations being put into practice. So it's very inspiring to talk to both of them.
Absolutely. And they with you. So yes, to confirm, your Instagram handle is the number one, followed by MZ Jacobson, your last name, and Mark's Twitter account is MZ Jacobson without the one in front of it.
Yeah.
So I'd like to wrap up, Mark. Thank you so much for this incredible opportunity to chat with you. I'm such a fan. What advice would you give to people who want to pursue a career in science or technology, or specifically climate change solutions, as you have done?
Well, my first advice is do something that you're passionate about, because that's what's going to keep you in the field. If you're doing it just because it's popular or somebody suggested you do it, that's probably not the best reason to do it. If you're passionate about it and you really want to make a difference, and stick to it. Don't be frustrated with. There are a lot of naysayers in this space. Try not to be frustrated by that. But do you realize that this is where things are going? I mean, we are going to be investing in clean renewable energy for decades to come, and that's not only electricity. That's also storage. That's building energy. That's vehicles and industry as well. And there's transmission distribution. So there are a lot of areas of energy. So just realize and stay confident that this is something that's going to continue to be an important area of research and development for many decades to come. But do it only if you're passionate about it, because that's really what's going to drive the fastest change in your own. That'll put you at your best as well if you're passionate about it.
Okay, well, Mark, again, thank you. I want to share the cover of your book again with everybody who might want to jot it down. 100% Clean Renewable Energy and Storage for Everything. This is a Bible for anybody interested in all of the interworkings of how we go from a fossil fuel powered economy to a 100% clean renewable energy economy. It's fascinating. It's beautifully written. The background notes and indexes and references are all just superb. And really, whatever you want to know is going to be in this book, and it's on Amazon, and I recommend it highly. And Mark, you're a friend and an inspiration to me, and I thank you so much for your time today. And hope you're looking forward to a great summer ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stacy. I really appreciate all your support over the years, and it's been great knowing you and talking with you about all these issues and your own books too. You should say something about your books.
Well, I do have a book coming out, a children's book actually coming out this year, that you kindly endorsed, called Planet Power: Explore the World's Renewable Energy. So I think it's fair to say, Mark, that book was largely inspired by your work that I've learned about over these many years. We've known each other, I think it's 11 now. And what I did was I distilled your science into rhyming verses for children, and then with some prose in the back to help them more fully understand it. But I give you so much credit for that inspiration. And I thank you for your endorsement of it as well. I want to let everybody know that this interview will also be posted on Renewable Energy World. If you want to go there, renewableenergyworld.com, where my original review of Mark's book is posted. And it will be here in perpetuity on my website, Stacy Clark Climate and Stacy Clark Books. So, Mark, thank you for educating the world. Thank you for educating me. And thank you for educating younger students as well. We appreciate you more than you know. And I look forward to seeing you in person again soon.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Stacy.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Take good care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.